Hello, this is Ziad, and this is a short session on coding and some of the basic principles that we're going to learn together today. So let's say you have a computer and you want this computer to do some operations for you. For example, the basic mathematical operations like adding, subtracting, division, and multiplication. So you want to tell the computer that you want to do something, right? But basically the computer doesn't understand English or any other human language. So what you would want to do is you would want to write your code on some software. So this software is called an IDE, Integrated Development Environment. So what is an IDE? It's basically a text editor that, let's say it's a Notepad, let's say it's Notepad++, Visual Studio Code, whatever you're writing on. So basically this is the window that you're going to be writing your instructions to the computer. Now, when you write your instructions and click run or whatever, if your IDE is having a compiler integrated, and what a compiler is actually the translator that will take these lines of code that you've written in English or whatever language that you understand, and it translates it into a language that the computer can understand. So it is basically in the middle of you and the computer. So what the compiler does is it takes this piece of code that you've written on the IDE and it translates it into a binary language. And this is a .o file. However, basically it takes what you've written and translates it to the computer. Okay, so now the computer knows what you want to do and is going to work to perform that operations that you gave it or provided it. Now, what kind of operations can you imagine? So let's say you have a function, and we're going to describe what are these functions in a minute. But let's say you have some block of code, yeah, and you want to tell the computer that, okay, computer, please, I have two numbers that I want to add together. So you want to let the computer know what is your number one is and what is number two, right? So what you do is you define a variable inside the memory of the computer and another variable, which is number two. And then when you tell the computer that, okay, computer, please, I want to define two variables, and then the computer goes to its memory, and the memory is like a drawer over here that has a lot of spaces, let's say. Not all of them are empty. Some are full, but some are empty, so you can use them. But you don't really tell the computer where to keep your values. So basically you tell it, I want a space for number one, and then it reserves this space, let's say, and you tell it, I want space, reserve a space for number two, and it does it over here, okay? Okay, so now it only reserved these places, but it didn't really save any number into it. So let's assume that next you give it the operation. Number one, I want to add 3 and 5. So I'm going to say that number one is 3 is equal to 3. And what the compiler will do in this case, it will take the number that you've written here and after the equal operator and stores it inside number one. Where is number one? It doesn't matter. So right now we have it over here. So what the compiler does is it puts your value over here, 3, and then let's say I want to say that number 2 is 5. Then it does the same, takes the 5 and put it into number 2. So over here. And now you have your numbers stored. Okay, computer, please, now I want to add them together. So I want to add them together. I can have two options, either to destroy one of the main numbers to store the result into it, or what is better is I can create another variable. Let's call it result here. And I'm gonna store my result in there. So let's say the result, the computer assigned this space to be the result. And now what I can do is I can simply say result is equals to number 1 plus number 2. So now the value inside the result will be 3 plus 5, which is 8. Okay, so I want to tell the computer, please, can you also print this result for me? So what I'm going to write is print result. Now, there are different kinds of programming languages, and depending on which language you're using, these instructions might differ a little, but in concept they are the same. So you don't really have to worry about it that much. And what this will do, it will pop up a window and it will say 8. It will say nothing else but that. You can add some fancy instruction and say print, and then you give it something like result equals to, and then you print the result variable, and this would result in this instead. But now the interesting part that I wanted to address today is the functions. So as you can see, the code went sequentially. So it took line by line. When we wrote this line, it reserved a space in the memory for number 1. This one, it reserved a space for number 2. This one reserved a space for result. This one assigned the value inside number 1. This one assigned the value for number 2. This one did an arithmetic operation and added number 1 and number 2 together into the result. And the final one printed the result for us to see on the screen. Okay, but now let's say that I don't want to write a lot of lines inside my main functional window. So what I want to do is I want to create a function that takes these two numbers, adds them together. So what I can do is I can define a function, and a function can either have a return or no. So it can either perform an operation and that's it, or it can perform an operation and gives you a feedback of or a result of this operation. So let's start with the easy kind of operations, which does not return anything. So let's say I have a function that doesn't return anything. This is in programming is called void, or at least in C. And let's name it, you give it a name, and I'm gonna name it sum and print. And it takes two numbers, as we mentioned before, and you give it the data type of these numbers, but this we don't have to worry about this much, which is an int number 1 and number 2. So what I want the compiler to do is when I call on this function, I want the compiler to go ahead and add two numbers that I'm gonna pass to it. Okay, so in these curly brackets, you define what are you gonna do with these operations, or what are you gonna do in this function overall. So right here, I will say sum and print two numbers. So I will define a result inside it. Let's name it R whatsoever. And I'm gonna say R is equal to number 1 plus number 2. So what does this do is it takes a copy of the variables that you gave inside here and does some operation. So a copy of number 1 would be 3 and a copy of number 2 would be 5. So this would make R equals to 8. This is how you do a comment in C, by the way, or any language. So now we have r equals to 8, but I haven't printed it yet. So I want this function to also print the r. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask it to print this r for me. Print result is equals to, and I'm going to say, please print r. And I'm going to end my function. So now let's take this code again as a copy. Okay, it doesn't really copy, so let's just replace it over here. What I'm going to do is, instead of doing all of this part, I'm only going to ask the main script to do sum and print number 1 and number 2. And this will have the exact same result as all 3 or 4 lines that we have written over here before, and it will result in the same behavior. Thank you, keep learning, and goodbye.